Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Garden Hour with MU Extension. We're happy that you're able to join us this weekend. I'm not sure what the weather looks like in your part of the state, but it is gloomy and dark in east central Missouri. And I guess we'll see in our weather report here if we have some changes in the weather. But just so you know, we have folks all across the state that can help answer your horticulture questions. We are always happy to help out. It's always great to receive pictures from folks to look at their plant problems, but if you haven't interacted yet with your local horticulture specialist, feel free to jot down their email there and get in touch with them.
Justin, we're just seeing your beautiful face and not a PowerPoint.
Oh, that's awkward. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. As I said, we have a statewide footprint of horticulture specialists across the state. I also show this map at the end of the garden
I'm
hour.
sorry, Justin. Is it just me or is there anyone else only seeing Justin?
It's not just you.
Okay.
Okay. Let me try this one more time.
It's starting to come up.
Okay.
I see it, but you're not in presentation mode yet.
Are you seeing it now?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. In addition to our live program weekly, we also have YouTube snippets. So we take a highlight from each week and turn those into a short video, as well as archived versions of the entire garden hour, which are great to watch on a rainy day. And speaking of the weather, we're going to kick it over to hear some information from our state climatologist, Zack Leasor, on what's in store.
Hello, everyone. It's been another wet week across the state of Missouri, and we have another active weather day today. So, quite a bit to talk about as we get into our weather summary today. So, to start, just looking back at some of our recent rainfall here, this map is showing our radar estimated rainfall totals over the last week. And so this ends on 7 a.m. on Tuesday, and so captures most of that rainfall we saw overnight Monday as those storms marched east across the state. Certainly, they might have woken you up overnight on Monday. But overall, we saw a lot of this rainfall come through several different events over the past week. And while totals aren't as impressive as what we saw last week, still a really good widespread rainfall totals across the state. So everyone picked up at least a half inch of rainfall, but really several areas picked up in excess of 2 inches. So anywhere we see the yellow coloring on the map is going to be totals greater than 2 inches. But really, we saw some good areas of 3 and 4 inch totals as well in Northwest Missouri down to the Kansas City area, Southwest Missouri, and just south of St. Louis down to Cape Girardeau. Some of the areas that picked up some of the heaviest rainfall there. Now, we did pick up just a little bit more additional rainfall early Tuesday morning. And so this is what this map shows as some of those storms continued to move east on Tuesday morning. Those totals got picked up on our Tuesday rainfall data here. And so just a few more totals, especially in southeastern Missouri. And Cape Girardeau really picked up around an inch yesterday morning as the storms departed the state. But if we really look back and add up our rainfall over the past 2 weeks, so this shows our 14-day precipitation totals, we can see how significant these rainfall totals have been across the state. And so anywhere you see red on this map, we're talking in excess of 5 inches of rainfall over 2 weeks. And really, we're seeing pretty widespread totals of 5 to 8 inches in those red areas. We even have some areas that are shown here with kind of the pink color in excess of 10 inches of radar estimated rainfall. And we've also seen some station totals that are confirming what we're seeing with the radar here. So a very, very wet period over the past 2 weeks for the state of Missouri. And so it's kind of strange to talk about drought when we've had so much rainfall over the past few weeks. But if you remember, we really came into this spring with some lingering drought concerns and had a very dry February as well. And so this rainfall is welcome for helping with the drought conditions. And so this map from the U.S. Drought Monitor was released last Thursday on May 2nd. And so it's a little out of date and doesn't account for all of our recent rainfall, but we do see some improvements here. So we've really pretty much eliminated that D2 or severe drought across the state and are just left with abnormally dry and moderate drought conditions for now. And so certainly with the rainfall over the past week, we can expect some additional improvements to the map, especially across northern Missouri, where those totals were higher and getting into northwest Missouri. I would say the only area right now that's still a concern for drought conditions that aren't recovering is that extreme southern Missouri along the Arkansas border and getting into the Boot Heel as well. Some of these locations have gotten rainfall over the past couple of weeks, but aren't seeing those heavier totals. And so not enough to nudge us towards above average rainfall and start to help with drought conditions. So if you're in far southeastern Missouri, we're still worried about drought there, but elsewhere right now, really seeing some good drought recovery. Now, with all the rainfall we've had, we also had some severe weather Monday evening and getting overnight Monday into early Tuesday morning. And so here are some of the Storm Prediction Center storm reports for those storms. You see a lot of blue dots across the state of Missouri, especially west central Missouri. And these are damaging wind reports that we saw. A lot of reports of trees down, wind gusts in excess of 50, 60 miles per hour that caused some of the damage here as well. You'll also notice just a few red dots on this map. We did have some tornado reports, and those were confirmed yesterday by some National Weather Service storm surveys. These were just EF0 or EF1 tornadoes, but did cause some damage across the state. And so we definitely have some of these storm reports here. In addition to our severe weather, we're also concerned about our flooding once again. And so just like last week, we're still looking at several flood warnings, advisories, and watches across the state because of all of our recent rainfall. And so here you can see where those kind of green flood warnings follow some of our major rivers here, especially the Mississippi and Missouri. These flood warnings are mainly going to be due to higher stream flow along those rivers and some of the impacts there. But if you look at this dark green area, St. Louis and south down to Cape Girardeau and west over to Springfield, that's a flood watch we have for today. And that's going to be more for a flash flood risk and less of a river flood risk. And so I'll show the forecast for today, which should provide a little more insight into why we have this flood risk. But the narrative right now is that our soils are pretty saturated. Stream flow, and especially in those larger streams and creeks right now, it is elevated. And so it won't take a lot of rainfall to cause some flooding concerns. So if we look at our May month-to-date summary so far, we've really only got a week of data, but with the rainfall, we're already well above average for rainfall so far this month in most spots. So if we look at our map here on the right, a lot of green. There's a few locations in central Missouri and towards the northeast that missed out on this rainfall over the past week and maybe only got around an inch. But those are also the locations that were some of our big winners last week. So really looking at the past 2 weeks, pretty much everybody's been pretty wet. Looking at our major sites, Kansas City, St. Louis, Springfield, Columbia, already ahead of rainfall or ahead of average for rainfall for the month so far. And if we look at temperatures, for most of our sites, we're seeing above average temperatures so far in May, running anywhere from 5 to 7 degrees above average. Kansas City is an outlier for now. I do want to remind everyone, we really only have about 6 days of May data in these month-to-date numbers. So Kansas City's seen a little bit more cloud cover with some of this rainfall, and it's skewed those numbers a little bit. But I expect as we get into the month, we'll See, Kansas City also have those above average temperatures like we're seeing elsewhere across the state. Now, as we get into our forecast for today, it's going to be a pretty active weather day across the state of Missouri. If we look at our surface chart here on the left, we see a pretty potent area of low pressure situated just across northwest Missouri. And to the east there, we see a warm front extending from that area of low pressure. And what that warm front's going to do today is it's been pulling in some of that warm and moist air to our south. That's going to help the atmosphere become unstable, and we're going to have a pretty significant severe weather threat south of that warm front and southeast of that area of low pressure. And so if we look at our day one severe weather outlook from the Storm Prediction Center here on the right, what we see here is where you have southeastern Missouri from Cape Girardeau south down to the Boot Heel is a moderate risk of severe weather. And so this is going to be kind of the area where we'd circle for really those largest severe weather threats, but also this orange area, mainly areas south and east of I-44 in that enhanced risk, can also see some of these large severe storms today as well. Now, when we talk about modes of severe weather, I think all of them are on the table for today. So we could see tornadoes, we could see large hail, and we could see damaging winds with those storms as well. Now, in addition to our severe threat today, we also do have that threat for flash flooding. And so on the left here is our day one excessive rainfall outlook from the Weather Prediction Center. And I really want to focus on that area in yellow, which is our slight risk for flash flooding. On the right here, if we look at our day one precipitation forecast, it doesn't align exactly with where that flash flood risk is, but I think this precip forecast is really showing that we're going to see some pockets of locally heavier rainfall set up where we're seeing these storms today. And we're also expecting to potentially see some training of thunderstorms. And so training of thunderstorms means we could see some of those heavier thunderstorms continuously moving over the same areas and dumping some locally higher rainfall totals. Now, where exactly those higher totals set up, it's really difficult to forecast, and we really can't get an idea until the storms are actually moving across the area. But it's definitely something to watch this afternoon and evening, is that flash flood threat from some of these storms as well. And so I urge everyone to be weather aware today and make sure you have a way to get your warnings and monitor both that severe weather and flooding risk. But the good news is once we make it back past today, we're going to see a cold front move through the area and usher in a period of cooler and drier weather to get us through the rest of the week and into the weekend as well. And so the maps here that I'm showing are from the National Weather Service, and they are our percent probability of precipitation each day from Thursday through Sunday here. And what we can generally see are that probabilities are very low. We're expecting some pretty pleasant weather. On Thursday and Saturday, you will notice there's a chance for a shower or two in some spots. Those precipitation probabilities of 20 or 30% are pretty low, so we're talking isolated showers. But overall, for most areas, it's going to be pretty dry in that late week to weekend period. Temperatures will start out coolest on Thursday behind that cold front, so highs in the upper 60s and 70s. Lows Thursday night will dip into the upper 40s, especially in northern Missouri, but then we'll gradually warm up through the weekend. Really by Sunday, looking at highs in the upper 70s with lows in the lower 50s. Now, looking into next week, really some of those models right now are suggesting that we could see some more rainfall by Monday or Tuesday. But as of right now, it looks like a pretty weak system. Here we can look at our precipitation forecast. This is valid for Monday through Wednesday of next week. And maybe southwest Missouri picking up a quarter to a half inch, but still a lot of uncertainty with this system as it looks pretty weak in that Monday to Tuesday time frame. So we'll need to keep an eye on the forecast to get a better idea of how this might play out early next week. But if we look at our 8 to 14 day outlooks here from the Climate Prediction Center, what we do see on the right in our precipitation outlook is higher chances for some of that above average precipitation. And so this suggests that once we get into that week 2 period, we might have more of an active period like we've seen and see those rainfall chances increase once again. Otherwise, our temperatures look to stay above average. We've already started May with above average temperatures, and looking at our 8 to 14-day temperature outlook, that looks like the case in not just Missouri, but for all of the United States as well. So that's all I've got for today. Again, everyone be safe with our severe weather today, and then hopefully everyone can also enjoy some calmer weather as we get into the weekend. So thank you.
All right. Well, some dry weather and some pleasant temperatures. Hopefully that soil can dry up a little bit if folks are obviously still getting things into the garden. And I want to go ahead and pass it over now to my colleague Donna Aufenberg that's going to talk about a really helpful practice of mulching.
Okay, thank you, Justin. Okay, so I have been getting a lot of questions about mulching. Is it time to mulch and what to mulch with? Lots of different questions. Well, there are lots of benefits to mulching. And one thing I think is a gardener's best friend is mulch. And I can't emphasize mulch enough. And a lot of it has to do with a lot of reasons. One is beautification. Your landscape will look 100% better with a good layer of mulch. It suppresses weeds, and it also keeps them from growing as fast. Reduces the diseases, especially in the vegetable garden. Reduces erosion. Warms and cools the soil. Well, warms it when we are cold, and of course cools it when we are hot. And then of course it holds that moisture. And when, historically we have droughts in the summer. They can last anywhere from a couple of weeks up to 6 to 8 weeks and sometimes longer. And so in the summer, mulches are very important when it comes to holding in that moisture that we want to keep around our plants. So I can't emphasize enough, we need to mulch in the garden. And whether it's a vegetable garden, whether it's a landscape, whether it's just perennial beds, mulching can be your best friend. So what can you mulch with? Lots of different things, shredded bark, wood chips, straw, not hay. Remember, straw is from a wheat field and we're harvesting the stems of that wheat. So there's no weed seeds present typically. Hay, however, is we're harvesting the leaf matter of grass. And so when they are putting hay into a bale, we can accumulate a lot of weed seed heads and a lot of trash. And so that's why I say straw, not hay. Also, sawdust, only if it's composted. If you use raw sawdust, you can really have issues with nitrogen being tied up in the gardens. And so we really steer away from fresh sawdust. Composted is okay. Pine needles, newspaper. If you do newspaper, make sure you're doing it several layers thick. Be prepared to wet it immediately and also hold it down by some other material such as straw, brickbats, anything that, because once that newspaper dries, it will blow away. So just be careful on that. And then if you want to do shredded paper, you can do that, or shredded newspaper, you can do that. But once again, make sure it's wetted, make sure it compacts onto the ground so that you're holding in that moisture. You can use grass clippings, but the caveat to that is make sure that you're not using a herbicide on your grass before harvesting the grass clippings, because that sometimes we see a carryover for those herbicides into that that mulch that we use as grass. And then, of course, don't forget, we can always use weed barriers. I'm not the biggest fan of weed barriers or ground covers, but they can have their place and they can be useful. And so that is always another option. So what are some tips for mulching? Well, any material that you use for mulching, we promote 3 to 4 inches deep, and that is just keeping it on top. Some of those materials that we use for mulching can, if it's mixed in, can lead to that nitrogen tie-up. So try to keep those mulches just on top. So 3 to 4 inches deep. If it settles after a couple weeks and you notice that it's not as deep as you thought it should be, come back and add some more mulch. And that even goes especially for straw. I usually put it really nice and thick, and within a couple of weeks, it's really compacted. And then I notice that there's bare spots showing up through my mulch, and then I know it's time to go add more. When we're mulching in the landscape around trees, around shrubs, I always try to get everybody to think donut, don't think volcano. You know, anytime we're piling that mulch up on the trunks, we're causing stem deterioration. We can cause roots to come up and above the ground surface and girdle trees. Lots of different things can start to happen. So, you know, X-nay on the volcanoes, try to always keep that mulch pulled away from the center, you know, in where that stem is. And that's why I say think donut. And don't get it too deep. You know, I know in the American culture, more is better. When certain things in horticulture, more is not better. And so mulch is one of those. 6-inch deep mulch is not a wise thing, because we can really start to have the opposite effect of what the mulch is intended to do. And so just keep that in mind, not too deep. And then on timing on mulch, you know, I always try to tell people, don't do it too soon in the spring and don't do it too soon in the fall. And a lot of it's because you want that ground to cool down nicely, keep things in the going dormant in the fall. And then in the spring, you don't want to encourage plants too soon. So just think about those things on the timing. And so, but I believe mulch can be your best friend if it's utilized correctly. And mulch, mulch, mulch. That's all I can promote. So back to you, Justin.
Awesome. Thanks, Donna. You know, one thing that we often get questions about is raised bed mix. So we have a soil testing lab on campus. We all get hundreds of soil tests a year that we're helping people understand and give them recommendations. And I started to notice in St. Louis and other areas, you know, folks are building raised beds and they're starting to fill them with a pre-purchased raised bed mix that might be sold by a landscaping company or a composting company. And we started to notice some trends and some challenges with that. And they are great materials in the sense that they're light, they're easy to move around. But I wanted to share some things that we had noticed over the years as it relates to raised beds. So are you guys seeing the right screen, Debbie?
Yes, looks great.
Okay, thank you. So last year we got some photos from someone who at a community garden, and they said, you know, there's these issues with our green beans. We can't really figure out what's going on. So fortunately, they had some good photos and some dates and things. So this photo was taken on May 20th. And the first planting on the left, you can see it's starting to yellow. There's starting to be some brown spots up here. The second planting on May 8th, that was just a couple weeks before the photo was taken, looks healthy and green. And fortunately, they followed up with some photos a little bit later. And so these photos were taken on June 5th, a couple weeks later. And you can see the picture on the left. The second planting that was previously green and lush is starting to yellow out. And then if we look on the right-hand side, we see the first planting in the foreground and the second planting in the rear. And you can see that that first planting is really yellowed out. It's starting to drop a lot of leaves. And those plants are really looking tough, right? Because they've been planted at this point for a month and a couple weeks. And even that second planting that was looking good is looking pretty tough. So these green bean seeds were not inoculated. And if you do plant green beans or peas, I'd encourage you to buy the little bag of garden inoculant. It often says N fixer, but that will allow the beans to fix atmospheric nitrogen. So what exactly is going on here? So this is a nitrogen deficiency, and it's fairly easy to diagnose because nitrogen is the plant's able to move nitrogen throughout the plant. And so in a nitrogen deficiency situation, the plant is able to take nitrogen stored in the older leaves and push it up to prioritize the growth of the new parts of the plant. So those older leaves will yellow out. They may end up just totally dropping off. And in general, the plants will just be stunted, right? They're just not growing. They're just not going anywhere. There's a pretty easy solution to this by applying some nitrogen. And if you want to get real scientific about it, we do actually have a lab that can do tissue analysis on the plants. So why is this happening? Well, it all has to do with the materials in the raised bed mix. And I know the resolution in this photo isn't great, but you'll notice that there's a lot of bark material, and that's not surface mulch. That's all throughout this raised bed material that fills that raised bed. So when we have these uncomposted high carbon materials, they have what we call a high carbon to nitrogen ratio. And when that ratio is 25:1 or higher, you start to have this nitrogen deficiency. So things like wood chips, sawdust, bark, these are all high carbon materials, and they could be found in unfinished compost. So maybe these were a compost component and that compost pile didn't get thoroughly composted, or they might just be added as a component in the raised bed mix to kind of bulk them up. So microbes, when they break down high carbon materials, they utilize free nitrogen in the soil, the nitrogen that plants would normally be able to take up, to facilitate the breakdown and decomposition of the high carbon materials. And this is when you get that deficiency. Folks often ask, well, if I'm putting mulch on the surface, will it cause nitrogen tie-up? And it will not. You don't have to worry about that. So if you're dealing with this type of deficiency, you can apply 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. You'll have the quickest response with a soluble fertilizer like calcium nitrate, but there are other synthetic forms, granular forms like a green up lawn fertilizer. Just make sure if it's a lawn fertilizer, it doesn't have weed and feed. There are also organic options available that are high nitrogen, but these will take a fairly long time to break down and start releasing that nitrogen. Something like blood meal is going to be a little more rapid release, for instance, than something like alfalfa meal, which will take a long time to break down. So if there's little or no greening up of those plants, you can come back another couple weeks later and apply an additional pound of nitrogen. But more than likely with that initial application, those plants will respond. We do have in our soil testing lab, if you wanted to test your soil, your raised bed mix, you can submit a sample, and you would also want to add a carbon to nitrogen ratio test. And that'll actually tell you all the normal fertility recommendations, pH, organic matter, as well as that carbon to nitrogen ratio. And if it's higher than 25:1, you're likely to deal with some nitrogen tie-up. So how do we get that 1 pound of nitrogen? How do we figure out how to apply that? So if we have a 12 by 3 foot raised bed that's 36 square feet, and we're using one of these green up lawn fertilizers, 2803, there's some calculations here you can do to get you the information that you need. Divide that 1 pound by the decimal percentage. That'll give you 3.5 pounds of that particular fertilizer. You create the ratio, but you might be saying, well, I don't want to do all those calculations. And that's fine because we have a fertilizer calculator tool. And so you can just go ahead and drop in the square feet, drop in the 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet that's recommended, put your numbers on the fertilizer bag right here and hit calculate, and it'll tell you you need 1 pound of that selected fertilizer to cover 36 square feet. So same outcome, but a lot easier than having to do those calculations. And just to give you a point of reference, 1 cup of garden fertilizer is approximately 1/2 pound of material. So in this situation, if we applied a little bit less than a 1/4 cup, we're going to get that 1/10 of a pound of fertilizer that we need for that bed. So I hope that helps, and just keep in mind that we do have that soil testing lab if you're having these kind of issues. So I'm actually going to kick it back to Donna at this point, and she's going to talk about bedding plant mixes.
Okay, thank you, Justin. So this sort of follows the same premise, what Justin's already been talking about. I get a lot of questions about potting mix here lately, especially since a lot of our box stores are switching up on us and we can't find what we're normally used to using on potting mixes. And so I've had a frequent phone call of, this store doesn't carry what I'm used to using. What do I use now? Or when they open a product, they see that, oh, there's these big chunks of wood in there. Is that normal? Am I supposed to use this? What's it going to do to my plants? Well, one thing I'm here to tell you is a lot of those have been formulated to be used in container gardens. And so if you're worried about the big chunks, you might toss them aside. They are okay in there. They are a composted softwood. And so it typically will not tie up the nutrients like what Justin was talking about. But if you've noticed on some of the bags, a lot of them say that there's fertilizer added in there. And so just be assured that there's probably enough of a fertilizer charge in there to keep a nutrient deficiency from happening. So what is the difference in some of these potting materials? And I was going to show you two pictures if I can get my computer to work. Here we go. So off to the right is our traditional, what we have found in previous years of potting mix. So it's our the peat moss mixed with the vermiculite or the perlite with probably pH adjusted and some micronutrients added. And so this is what we have been used to finding. In the last several years, the market is trying to find a more sustainable product than peat moss because as we are harvesting the peat moss, we are exhausting the peat bogs. And so we cannot replenish that. So they are trying to make peat last a lot longer by adding other organic materials into the mixes. And that is why we've started seeing a lot of bulkier, woodier mixtures. And so I encourage all of you to flip that bag over and take a look at what's in there. It's okay for those bulkier pieces to be there, the woodier pieces. Just know that they still have been formulated to be a container plant mixture. And so it's okay to use. I typically, I will be honest with you, I like what's on the right better than what's on the left. So what I will do is I'll buy a bag of each and sort of mix it. That's okay too. But, one of our state specialists said earlier that if you find something you like, try to always keep using it. That way it stays consistent. I tend to shop around and find the cheapest things. That's not always a good thing. Sometimes I've been burnt. And so find something that you like and try to stick with it. And it's okay to be a little different on the mixes. Read the bag. I always try to tell people a good mix should support those roots, should provide air, water, and some nutrients. Sometimes it's just the minor nutrients. Some that actually say feeds for 4 to 6 months, those will actually have additional nutrients added in there. And just remember that you want a good loose mix, so it's going to allow for good root growth, and it's going to really support that plant. I always ask the question, do you need the formula with the additional fertilizer? Well, I believe that when you have the woodier chips in there, that additional fertilizer probably is a plus. So that we don't end up in a situation like what Justin was talking about, where the plants can't pick up that nitrogen. And so I encourage you all to flip that bag over and read what the components are in that bag, because a lot of times it'll tell you how much sphagnum peat moss is in there. It's going to tell you how much, if it's got perlite or if it's got vermiculite or if it's had lime added to adjust the pH. So knowing what you're buying is good. And so that's why I promote reading the bag. And any of these that say potting mix on them, I think are generally good. I have found a few that say potting soil or garden soil, and it's still some combination of sphagnum peat moss and different components. So I urge everybody to flip that bag over and read before buying, because there's all sorts of formulations out there, and find one that's going to suit your situation. Okay, back to you, Justin.
All right. Thanks, Donna. That's really helpful. Yeah. And I think you made a good point with the composted softwood. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of those raised bed mixes have some chipped hardwood. So that's an important distinction. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Pong Tien, the director of the Plant Diagnostic Clinic and our resident plant doctor. He doesn't take insurance, but he's super helpful. And I'm going to hand it over to him.
Good afternoon, everyone. Time for I see sick plants. I apologize. Every week I show you sick plants, it's definitely not very insightful to look. Every week it's different diseases, but you can help me today to tell me what caused the disease problem. So as you can see, this is a picture from my client showing this is actually oak twig. You can see the oak leaves here, and all the leaves starting kind of like twisting. And the interesting thing is that on the top of those distorted growth of the oak leaves, there's something like a fluffy, hairy things on the top, making you think, oh, could this be something like an insect or fungus? Like I said, this week gonna be a really tricky one and gonna be a tough one. So what could be the cause based on your observation? Would that be powder mildew? Would that be garbage? Would that be wasp? Would that be herbicide damage or spider mites? I'm gonna let Jared to show the poll, and then give you 30 seconds to give me your the best shot. Okay. Thank you for voting. I'm gonna give you another 10 seconds. There are still some people who didn't vote, may take more time. As you can see in the background, you saw on the leaves also has some kind of swelling thing, okay? All right, let's stop here. I'm gonna share the results. I guess we have a kind of like two winners. One is garbage. This is the top. The second one is the spider mites. Wow, you guys are awesome. Let me show you the answer. It is a garbage. That's a insect that can form gall on the oak. And this oak gall has a really special name called a gnarled oak leaf mage galls. I mean, based on the name, you can tell it's not really scientific name or really formal name. It's actually given by my dear friend, Professor Joe Box. So I'm gonna cite a lot of photos from him. He's a master, even the king of the galls. So this is the leaf gall on the oak produced by gall mage, which is shown here. And this is not caused by wasp or spider. I mean, I know wasp can cause a lot of types of galls, but this one is special. It's caused by garbage. Even the fluffy and the hairy thing make you think this could be powder mildew, but it's not. So let me show you some effects of this oak gall. So this gall can appear through all plant tissues across the tree canopy. Basically, the symptom will be swelling, thickening, and darkening. And on the top of the gall, you will see those hairy, fuzzy, white hairs on the top. And the female garbage will lay eggs into the plant tissue. And they, at the same time, they're really smart. They can inject some chemicals which resemble the plant hormone. So the plant receives the plant hormone. They were like, oh, we need to build up more. We need to grow more. So that they cause a term called overgrowth. And that will build up the gall formation. So this gall will serve as a nutrition source to feed the immature gall maker when they grow up, when they hatch from the eggs. So basically, every time you see the gall, that's a physiological or hormonal disorder from the plant. But there are multiple factors can trigger the gall formation. For example, the gall mage, like we talked about today, every mites can cause galls. Fungus can cause galls. Bacteria can cause galls. So galls is actually like the tumor of the human being, and is part of our body, but it was triggered by some bad stuff. So those are all the facts. You think this is the only gall I'm gonna introduce you? No, actually, I'm not done yet. I have many galls to show you. Those galls are different type of galls from oak tree. Of course, some galls are really host or variety specific. The first one is a leaf patio gall, mostly on the patio or close to leaf. This one is very notorious. It's called a horn oak gall. And basically, it can cause gall on the stem. And basically, they can stress the stem, cause the vascular dieback. And this one is very cute, I think. It's called a pine cone oak gall. This one is, I normally consider this is oak gall without a horn. So this is a goatee oak gall. This one is oak apple wasp gall. My kids actually picked one of this the other day. Actually not last year. For a year, I don't know what it is until I found it during the preparation for this talk. So they're very big, like a ping pong ball on the backside of the leaf. If you look for the smaller side gall, this is oak leaf gall. They're very tiny comparing the size of the leaf. And this is all the galls. I just want to show you some photos made by Professor Joe Boggs. And if you have any question regarding oak galls or some other very interesting photos, let me know. Send a photo to plantclinic@missouri.edu. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good day.
Awesome. Thanks, Pong. Always appreciate those segments. I'm going to hand it over to this point to Dr. David Trinklein, who's going to talk about a very important and fun crop to grow of corn.
Now, am I in presentation mode?
Not yet.
Hmm. How
There
about
you go.
now?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about one of my favorite subjects, that being sweet corn. I come from a family that takes growing sweet corn very seriously. Not to have ripe sweet corn by the 4th of July was, when I was growing up, a public embarrassment. Couldn't show our face in public for several weeks after that. Sweet corn is a very interesting plant and somewhat confusing when it comes to the nomenclature or the shorthand notation that comes with it. First of all, sweet corn is a plant that, when you go by, especially the supermarket box store, not mentioning any names here, but you see these petrified looking ears of corn, you kind of pity the people who have never tasted fresh sweet corn. And there's a real art to both growing as well as preparing fresh sweet corn. From the standpoint of the preparation, one begins by getting a pot of water, a slow boil on the stove, and then you send somebody out to the sweet corn patch that is very astute at judging the state of ripeness. They gather the corn and they shuck and husk and clean the corn on the way to the home. And immediately upon getting into the home, They go to the kitchen and gently but safely immerse the sweet corn in boiling water. Sweet corn aficionados will boil it for 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Not 4:25, not 4:35. 4 minutes and 30 seconds, at which time you have one of nature's really delightful treats ready to consume. Now, there's a method to that madness. Whenever an ear of sweet corn is removed from the mother plant, the sugar that it contains immediately starts to change to starch. We know what sugar tastes like. I hope you've never had to eat starch, but it's a far cry from sugar. So this is why I say these box stores that have the sweet corn shipped in from who knows where at this time of the year, those folks really don't know what sweet corn tastes like. Bit of background here. Field corn is Zea mays. That's the scientific notation. Sweet corn is a mutation that occurred somewhere in antiquity from field corn. Sweet corn is Zea mays saccharata, coming from the Latin meaning sweet, and variety, that's a botanical variety, rugosa, meaning wrinkled. It's a recessive mutation, meaning that in order to contain the sugars that field corn doesn't have, there has to be a double copy of that gene in sweet corn. Speaking of genes, the first notation that you'll likely see, especially in days of old, was SU. That stands for sugary. And that was the first type of sweet corn. It dates back over a century ago that it was identified, and as such caused there to be a delightful eating experience where that hadn't occurred before. Sweet corn seed is noted for its lack of storability. And excavating ancient ruins and so forth suggests that Native American populations probably didn't eat sweet corn. Perhaps they didn't like the taste. More likely, they found the kernels of seed difficult to store. Well, that was all well and good until sugar enhanced, or SE, is the shorthand notation of sweet corn, came along. It has even a greater amount of sugar, and it tends to lose the sugar, or the conversion from sugar to starch is slower than in varieties with just the SU gene. Again, freshly picked, it might be difficult to detect SU from SE, but in a 6-10 days, the SE will still taste quite sweet, whereas the sugary SU is going to deteriorate in table quality. Then along came sweet corn, which was undescribably sweet. It was almost as if you took a sweet corn SU variety and sprinkled sugar on it before eating it. These are the so-called SH2 or shrunken gene super sweet type. Shrunken is a good term to describe it because the seeds were very shriveled. And especially the early ones that were the SH2 type were difficult to germinate, especially in cooler soil. That's why we had to wait until the soil thoroughly warmed before we planted those. One of the problems with the SH2 gene is that the pericarp of the seed was rather chewy. And people didn't like that. You want sweet corn to pop off and not that you have to tear it off with your incisors or so forth. The synergistic types are a blend of SE and SH2. So there is enough SH2 to give us a nice, sweet corn, but not so much that it becomes a little bit unpleasant to bite off and chew. And then the very latest would be the augmented super sweets, which again primarily are the SH2 types, but as such have additional traits in them that maintain that sweetness even longer. I show you on the bottom right a type of sweet corn that's called peaches and cream. That's the variety name. This is known as a bicolor sweet corn. And since that was one of the first really improved varieties on the market, people still associate this bicolor, some white and some yellow, on the same cob as being superior from the standpoint of eating quality. But that's not necessarily the case. It's just a matter of people imagining this to be sweeter because they knew that peaches and cream was very sweet. Well, here are my picks for sweet corn varieties. If you're out looking, oh, I don't know, at the seed rack, if you can find them, maybe on the internet or so forth, if you haven't shopped yet for your sweet corn seed. As far as I'm concerned, Honey Select is a standard of excellence against which all sweet corn varieties should be judged. It's an SH2 shrunken gene type. It does germinate fairly well, even in cool soil. It's moderate in its maturity, 82 days, but the flavor and sweetness is outstanding. Once you grow Honey Select, you probably will not go back to a different type. The leading seller on the market, and I checked with a friend of mine who is in seed sales, is a variety called Incredible. It's the SE type, sugary enhanced. Just a bit longer in maturity. It has outstanding table quality. And as such, a lot of seed is sold. If you're looking for something just a little bit earlier, still with good eating quality, Bodacious, again, the SE sugary enhanced type is 10 days earlier than Incredible, 75 days. It has good seedling vigor, so not only is it shorter in maturity, but frankly, we can plant it just a little bit earlier in maybe a soil that's not quite as warm as we'd like for it to be if you plant Honey Select, but it still does well because of that seedling vigor. Candy corn is an HSE type, long in maturity, holds sugar well. Candy corn, again, as the name suggests, is very sweet and gaining popularity, although you'll see it's about a week later than Honey Select. Providence is an SH2 type, 80 days, and it's bicolored. You'll find that companies or firms that breed new varieties of sweet corn usually release at the same time a standard yellow type, giving it a name like incredible, and then concurrently a bicolored type, giving it a different name, but frankly, the characteristics and the genetics are very, very similar to those of the standard yellow type. But Providence is, if you're into bicolored, a very good bicolored type with the SH2 shrunken gene, 80 days, fairly good seedling vigor, and as such, probably the third bestseller on the market. Now, in closing, I was not around in 1913, and I pulled this picture from a historical society in Delaware, which claimed to have raised the largest ear of sweet corn in the history of the human race. I have my doubts. Why do I have my doubts? A, that just seems doctored. But B, you'll notice in the back, there are no leaves on the trees. So if this was corn, it wasn't sweet corn, it was field corn. Again, I say we're into planting weather. If you haven't planted your own sweet corn, try some. You probably will never go back to buying store-bought sweet corn again if you taste fresh sweet corn. That's all I have, Jason. Back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Dr. Trinklein. That really helped demystify all those letters for me, and I'm looking forward to some fresh sweet corn. So I'm going to hand it over to Debi Kelly, who recently got back from a trip from the Netherlands. So I'd like to hear about that.
Yeah, so every week I'll try to do a little bit about what we've learned when we were over in the Netherlands, and something that was really interesting and stuck out to all of us from Missouri. And again, there were 4 of us that went, was their container gardening. And with Mother's Day coming up, it's an opportunity where people are going to go out to the stores and start buying their plants and refilling containers that they've had in the past. But I just want to show you what they do in the Netherlands. They have very, very limited space in Amsterdam, which is where we stayed, although we ventured out from the city to see a lot of horticultural industry, which is very interesting. So there's a very little space, and they utilize every individual little space that they possibly can to grow plants. They have miniature gardens, lots of window boxes, a lot of windowsills, planting in bags, hanging baskets, and almost every house had plants or flowers that were in bloom in their windows as well. It was just amazing. And here's a picture of Katie Kamler from St. Genevieve. And this is outside Hortus Botanicus, the second longest viable garden in the Netherlands. And you'll notice here the wisteria actually growing up and alongside the house right there. This isn't very much space, and they take and utilize every piece of space they possibly can. When we were at Keukenhof, there were some indoor displays as well, and that's where last week, if you were here, we had the tulips that Katie and I mentioned. But they were getting creative with their pots. This one in the middle I thought was pretty ingenious, taking old jeans and just tearing them into pieces and putting them on the outside of a pot that may not look as nice as what it used to be years ago when you purchased it. This one was just scarves. In the recent past, women were wearing scarves around their necks all the time, adding to their wardrobe. And now people aren't wearing them as much, but you still have them. Here's an idea of what you could do with it. And of course, wooden pots were all over the place there in the Netherlands. What was also interesting is a lot of windowsills. You'll notice here, it doesn't even look like there's any soil, but there is beautiful roses and different types of plants that are growing in these little boxes that were right here on the couple of steps to go down. But almost every house, especially along the canal zone area of Amsterdam, had somewhere, somehow plants that were growing. Even if they didn't have any space, they would have a window box of some sort. And again, notice hardly any space, but they had plants growing up along the building and around their windows. This was a wheelbarrow just full of multicolors of different sorts of plants. That was just simply beautiful. But also what we found was interesting is that along the canals, there were people that actually live in these different houseboats. And a lot of these different boats had plants growing on top. So we're talking about a different kind of rooftop gardening when we're in Amsterdam. But some of these are the same boats on the right, but it was just a different perspective of what you could see. And they were just growing all kinds of bushes. It was really hard to tell what kind they were growing up there, but chances are they're probably growing some of their own different types of bushes that had fruit on them in some capacity. But just the colors that are here, just the different pots, all the open spaces that they had. This one, it looked like they actually did some sort of a raised bed, so to speak, on top of the boat. And again, another boat that had just different pots on top of it. So it was really, really interesting to see what their concept of container growing is, that it's not necessarily always in a pot, but it could be just that one little space next to their front door and having something grow on it. So again, I just want to tell folks that Mother's Day is coming, and if people haven't purchased their plants and they have pots, think about thrillers, fillers, and spillers. That's all I have.
Awesome. Thanks, Debbie. All right. Well, thanks everybody again for joining us. We're weekly through the growing season here. We really like to get questions from folks across the state because we like to answer those questions during the garden hour. That helps us with our timely topics from the issues that folks are seeing across the state. So you can submit those questions at the ipmmissouri.edu town halls, and you can include photos. And if you'd like to save the chat for some of those helpful links in there, you can just hover over these three dots at the top and click the Save Chat button, and then that will be saved as a file on your computer. And once again, if you don't know your horticulture specialist, check your county here and jot down their email. We're always happy to provide assistance, answer questions, look at photos, and give helpful tips to folks across the state. So that is all we have for today, and I appreciate everybody joining us, and we look forward to seeing you back next week.